The Ascent of Mount Carmel by St. John of the Cross. Chapter 30, which treats of the interior words that come to the Spirit formally by a supernatural means, warns the reader of the harm which they may do and of the caution which is necessary in order that the soul may not be deceived by them. The interior words belonging to the second type are formal words, which at certain times come to the Spirit by supernatural means, without the intervention of any of the senses, sometimes when the Spirit is recollected, and at other times when it is not. I call them formal because they are communicated to the Spirit formally by a third person, the Spirit itself playing no part in this, and they are therefore very different from those which we have just described, because not only is there this difference, that they come without any such intervention of the Spirit itself as takes place in the other case, but also, as I say, they sometimes come when the Spirit is not recollected, and even when it is far from thinking of the subject of what is being said to it. This is not so in the first type of locution, namely that of successive words, which always has some relation to the subject which the soul is considering. These words are sometimes very clearly formed, and sometimes less so, for they are frequently like conceptions in which something is said to the Spirit, whether in the form of a reply to it, or in that of another manner of address. Sometimes there is only one word, sometimes there are two or more, sometimes the words succeed one another like those already described, for they are apt to be continuous, either instructing the soul or discussing something with it. And all this comes to pass without any part being played therein by the Spirit, for it is just as though one person were speaking with another. And in this way, we read, it came to pass with Daniel, who says that the angel spoke within him. This was a formal and successive discourse within his spirit, which instructed him, even as the angel declared at the time, saying that he had come to instruct him. When these words are no more than formal, the effect which they produce upon the soul is not great, for ordinarily they serve only to instruct or illumine with respect to one thing, and in order to produce this effect it is not necessary that they should produce any other effect more efficacious than the purpose to which they are leading. And when they are of God, they invariably work this in the soul, for they make it ready and quick to do that which it is commanded or instructed to do. Yet at times they take not from it the repugnance or difficulty which it feels, but are rather wont to increase these, according as God ordains for the better instruction, increased humility, and greater good of the soul. And this repugnance most commonly occurs when the soul is commanded to do things of a high order, or things of a kind that may exalt it. When things are commanded it that conduce to its greater lowliness and humility, it responds with more readiness and ease. And thus we read in Exodus that when God commanded Moses to go to Pharaoh and deliver the people, he showed such great repugnance that God had to command him 3 times to do it and perform signs for him. And all this was of no avail until God gave him Aaron for a companion to take part of the honor. When, on the other hand, the words and communications are from the devil, it comes to pass that the soul responds with more ease and readiness to things that are of greater weight, and for lowlier things it conceives repugnance. The fact is that God so greatly abhors seeing souls attracted by high position that even when he commands and obliges them to accept such positions, he desires them not to be ready and anxious to command. It is this readiness which God commonly inspires in the soul through these formal words that constitutes one great difference between them and those other successive words. The latter move not the Spirit so much, neither do they inspire it with such readiness, since they are less formal, and since the understanding has more to do with them. Nevertheless, successive words may sometimes produce a greater effect by reason of the close communication that there is, at times, between the divine Spirit and the human. It is in the manner of their coming that there is a great difference between the two kinds of locution. With respect to formal words, the soul can have no doubt as to whether or not it is pronouncing them itself, for it sees quite readily that it is not, especially when it has not been thinking of the subject of that which has been said to it. And even when it has been so thinking, it feels very clearly and distinctly that the words come from elsewhere. The soul must no more attach importance to all these formal words than to the other or successive words. For apart from the fact that to do so would occupy the spirit with that which is not a legitimate and proximate means to union with God, that is, faith, it might also very easily cause it to be deceived by the devil. For sometimes it is hardly possible to know what words are spoken by a good spirit and what by an evil spirit. By their effects they can hardly be distinguished at all, since neither kind produces effects of much importance. Sometimes, indeed, with imperfect souls, words which come from the devil have more efficacy than have these others, which come from a good spirit, with souls that are spiritual. The soul, then, must take no account of what these words may express, nor attach any importance to them, whether the spirit from which they come be good or evil. But the words must be repeated to an experienced confessor, or to a discreet and learned person, that he may give instruction and see what it is well to do, and impart his advice. And the soul must behave with regard to them in a resigned and negative way. And if such an expert person cannot be found, it is better to attach no importance to these words and to repeat them to nobody, for it is easy to find persons who will ruin the soul rather than edify it. Souls must not be given into the charge of any kind of director, since in so grave a matter it is of the greatest importance whether one goes astray or acts rightly. And let it be carefully noted that a soul should never act according to its own opinion, or accept anything of what these locutions express, without much reflection and without taking the advice of another. For strange and subtle deceptions may arise in this matter, so much so that I myself believe that the soul that does not set itself against accepting such things cannot fail to be deceived by many of them. And since we have treated of these deceptions and perils, and of the caution to be observed with regard to them, in chapters 17, 18, 19, and 20 of this book, I refer the reader to these, and say no more on this matter here. I only repeat that my chief instruction is that the soul should attach no importance to these things in any way. Chapter 31, which treats of the substantial words which come interiorly to the spirit, describes the difference between them and formal words, and the profit which they bring, and the resignation and respect which the soul must observe with regard to them. The third kind of interior words, we said, is called substantial. These substantial words, although they are likewise formal, since they are impressed upon the soul in a definitely formal way, differ nevertheless in that substantial words produce vivid and substantial effects upon the soul, whereas words which are merely formal do not. So that although it is true that every substantial word is formal, every formal word is not therefore substantial, but only, as we said above, such a word as impresses substantially on the soul that which it signifies. It is as if our Lord were to say formally to the soul, "Be thou good." It would then be substantially good. Or as if he were to say to it, "Love thou me." It would then have and feel within itself the substance of love for God. Or as if it feared greatly, and he said to it, "Fear not." It would at once feel within itself great fortitude and tranquillity. For the saying of God and his word, as the wise man says, is full of power, and thus that which he says to the soul he produces substantially within it. For it is this that David meant when he said, "See, he will give to his voice a voice of virtue." And even so with Abraham, when he said to him, "Walk in my presence and be perfect." Abraham was then perfect and walked ever in the fear of God. And this is the power of God's word in the gospel, wherewith he healed the sick, raised the dead, etc., by no more than a word. And after this manner he gives certain souls locutions which are substantial, and they are of such moment and price, that they are life and virtue and incomparable good to the soul. For one of these words works greater good within the soul than all that the soul itself has done throughout its life. With respect to these words, the soul should do nothing. It should neither desire them nor refrain from desiring them. It should neither reject them nor fear them. It should do nothing in the way of executing what these words express. For these substantial words are never pronounced by God in order that the soul may translate them into action, but that he may so translate them within the soul. Herein they differ from formal and successive words. And I say that the soul must neither desire nor refrain from desiring, since its desire is not necessary for God to translate these words into effect. Nor is it sufficient for the soul to refrain from desiring in order for the said effect not to be produced. Let the soul rather be resigned and humble with respect to them. It must not reject them, since the effect of these words remains substantially within it, and is full of the good which comes from God. As the soul receives this good passively, its action is at no time of any importance. Nor should it fear any deception, for neither the understanding nor the devil can intervene herein, nor can they succeed in passively producing this substantial effect in the soul in such a way that the effect and habit of the locution may be impressed upon it, unless the soul should have given itself to the devil by a voluntary compact, and the devil should have dwelt in it as its master, and impressed upon it these effects not of good but of evil. Inasmuch as that soul would already be voluntarily united to him in perversity, the devil might easily impress upon it the effects of his sayings and words with evil intent. For we see by experience that in many things, and even upon good souls, the devil works great violence by means of suggestion, making his suggestions very efficacious. And if they were evil, he might work in them the consummation of these suggestions. But the devil cannot leave upon a soul effects similar to those of locutions which are good, for there is no comparison between the locutions of the devil and those of God. The former are all as though they were not, in comparison with the latter. Neither do they produce any effect at all compared with the effects of God's. For this cause, God says through Jeremiah, "What has the chaff to do with the wheat? Are not my words perchance as fire, and as a hammer that breaks the rock in pieces?" And thus these substantial words are greatly conducive to the union of the soul with God, and the more interior they are, the more substantial they are, and the greater is the profit that they bring. Happy is the soul to whom God addresses these words. Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. Chapter 32, which treats of the apprehensions received by the understanding from interior feelings which come supernaturally to the soul, describes their cause and the manner wherein the soul must conduct itself, so that they may not obstruct its road to union with God. It is now time to treat of the fourth and last kind of intellectual apprehension, which we said might come to the understanding through the spiritual feelings which are frequently produced supernaturally in the souls of spiritual persons, and which we count amongst the distinct apprehensions of the understanding. These distinct spiritual feelings may be of two kinds. The first kind is in the affection of the will, the second in the substance of the soul. Each of these may be of many kinds. Those of the will, when they are of God, are most sublime, but those that are of the substance of the soul are very high and of great good and profit. As to these, neither the soul nor he that treats with it can know or understand the cause from which they proceed, or what are the acts whereby God may grant it these favors. For they do not depend upon any works performed by the soul, nor upon its meditations, though both these things are a good preparation for them. God grants these favors to whom he wills and for what reason he wills. For it may come to pass that a person has performed many good works, yet God will not give him these touches of his favor. And another will have done far fewer good works, yet God will give him them to a most sublime degree and in great abundance. And thus it is not needful that the soul should be actually employed and occupied in spiritual things, though it is much better that it should be so employed if it is to have these favors, for God to give it these touches in which the soul experiences the said feelings. For in the majority of cases the soul is completely heedless of them. Of these touches, some are distinct and pass quickly away. Others are less distinct and last longer. These feelings, inasmuch as they are feelings only, belong not to the understanding but the will, and thus I refrain of set purpose from treating of them here, nor shall I do so until we treat of the night and purgation of the will and its affections. This will be in the third book, which follows this. But since frequently, and even in the majority of cases, apprehensions and knowledge and intelligence overflow from them into the understanding, it would be well to make mention of them here for that reason only. It must be known, then, that from these feelings, both from those of the will and from those which are in the substance of the soul, whether they are caused suddenly by the touches of God, or are durable and successive, an apprehension of knowledge or intelligence frequently overflows, as I say, into the understanding. And this is normally a most sublime perception of God, most delectable to the understanding, to which no name can be given any more than to the feeling from whence it overflows. And these manifestations of knowledge are sometimes of one kind and sometimes of another. Sometimes they are clearer and more sublime, according to the nature of the touches which come from God, and which produce the feelings from which they proceed, and also according to their individual characteristics. It is unnecessary here to spend a great store of words in cautioning and directing the understanding, through these manifestations of knowledge, in faith, to union with God. For albeit the feelings which we have described are produced passively in the soul, without any effective assistance to that end on its own part, even so likewise is the knowledge of them received passively in the understanding, in a way called by the philosophers passible, wherein the understanding plays no part. Wherefore, in order not to go astray on their account, nor to impede the profit which comes from them, the understanding must do nothing in connection with these feelings, but must conduct itself passively, and not interfere by applying to them its natural capacity. For as we have said is the case with successive locutions, the understanding, with its activity, would very easily disturb and ruin the effect of these delicate manifestations of knowledge, which are a delectable supernatural intelligence that human nature cannot attain or apprehend by its own efforts, but only by remaining in a state of receptivity. And thus the soul must not strive to attain them or desire to receive them, lest the understanding should form other manifestations of its own, or the devil should make his entry with still more that are different from them and false. This he may very well do by means of the feelings aforementioned, or of those which he can himself infuse into the soul that devotes itself to these kinds of knowledge. Let the soul be resigned, humble, and passive herein, for since it receives this knowledge passively from God, God will communicate it whensoever he is pleased, if he sees the soul to be humble and detached. And in this way the soul will do nothing to counteract the help which these kinds of knowledge give it in its progress toward divine union, which help is great. For these touches are all touches of union, which is wrought passively in the soul. What has been said concerning this suffices, for no matter what may happen with the soul with respect to the understanding, cautions and instructions have been given it in the sections already mentioned. And although a case may appear to be different, and to be in no way included herein, there is none that cannot be referred to one of these, and thus may be deduced the instruction necessary for it. End of chapter 32. End of book 2.